Hello, and welcome to the Thyroid Warrior podcast. I'm Ebony, and I'm here as your wellness facilitator. I'm going to be sharing my experiences in managing Hashimoto's disease, and I really hope that it'll help you on your personal journey. Keep in mind, however, this does not substitute as medical advice. It is only for your information and motivational purposes only. Now, let's get started. Hello, friends. We are back, and we are ready to start talking about something called limited English proficiency. Now, you may be wondering, Ebony, you speak English. What? It's actually a really important topic that is near and dear to my heart, and it's something that I see quite a bit in healthcare especially, and I want to go over it so that if you or a loved one has issues or difficulty communicating in English, I want you to know that you have options. So the first thing that we're going to start off by doing is giving a definition and talking about where this came from. And as always, you can go to hhs.gov, and I will spare you from all of the crazy jargon that is in the Federal Register that talks about a lot of this, but you can also go to the National Institute on Minority Health and Health Disparities. That is the nimhd.nih.gov. I will also put that information in the show notes so that you can read on different resources that are available, as well as different resources in multiple languages. They have the National Library of Medicine in multiple languages. They have the FDA in multiple languages, and mental health resources in different languages as well. So I wanted to make sure that you had information to where you can go to find out more. But like I said, if English isn't your first language, and if you or a loved one find themselves having difficulty communicating, you want to think about an interpreter or having some type of documentation that can be used with you and your provider to ensure that you have access to care. Now, this also came about from Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And we're really and truly making sure that we're not discriminating based upon basically race, color, or national origin. And as a part of national origin, we also have to think about cultural and language differences as well. Now, if you really want to get into reading all of the documentation related to that, there is a website devoted to this, LEP, or the Limited English Proficiency, that's the acronym, .gov. So lep.gov, and you can read all about the Federal Register that goes into detail. It is a document from 2000 that you can look at to see all of the policy and information related to that. So here's why I want you to consider really and truly thinking about an interpreter. Now, the first thought they may come into your mind is, well, I speak that person's language. Why can't I be their interpreter? And there's nothing wrong with that. However, some organizations will require that you have a medical interpreter or a qualified bilingual staff. Just because you go to a clinic or the hospital and someone may be of a different race or ethnic background that has or speaks a different language, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're qualified to interpret in that way. So when you are starting the process of even having that conversation and you know that there is going to be a language barrier, you can request to have a medical interpreter there, or yes, a medical interpreter there with you. To start, this person has been trained on medical terminology and has a basic understanding of just different cultural differences that exist and how to make sure that even if you have someone that is a family member that comes in during the actual visit, that everyone can have an understanding of what's going on. Now, what's really important, and you can also take a look at the American Family Physician website, they have an excellent article to give you tips about how to use an interpreter and really how that conversation can go. And again, from my experience of witnessing procedures or visits that have an interpreter there, it has definitely helped the patient and reduced a lot of things that could have potentially gone wrong in the visit. So if you are someone that needs to use a medical interpreter, you may know, again, going back from last episode, how do you like to give and receive information? And if you or someone else is struggling to understand, you can bring a language card with you or take a picture of it online. If you literally type in like language card in Google, you will see like a little PDF document that says, this is the language that I prefer to speak. And you can literally point at it. And in most offices will have a document that has a list of those languages outlined there as well. And if you're having trouble or a loved one is having trouble understanding or communicating, have them look for that and have them point to it. And that front desk or medical professional should be able to contact a medical interpreter to be able to help you or a loved one during that appointment. And if you ask for it and they refuse, that's not a good thing. And you should report that, because by many standards, many governmental bodies are really pushing to make sure that we really and truly work to better communicate with our patients. And that's not something that's very tolerated at all. So if you're going to work with a medical interpreter, you definitely want to make sure that you communicate that you need one, and that provider is going to need to understand that you guys are going to need extra time, because the doctor is going to communicate, the interpreter is then going to communicate in that language, and you guys have to go back and forth. And whenever you have a medical interpreter, quote unquote, in your visit, you need to make sure that the doctor outlines that, or a healthcare provider outlines that in your note. So make sure that you're asking that they document who the interpreter is in the note. And make sure that your doctor, especially if you're going in with a parent, let's say, make sure they're not making unnecessary comments, because we all know that a lot of us, even when we're learning a different language, we often want to know the bad words or the words that have negative connotations to them. So keep that in mind when you're having those conversations. And really, when you are positioned in the room, or you know that your loved one is going by themselves, let's say, you want to make sure that your interpreter, if they're in person, that they're kind of either sitting, depending on your culture, that they're sitting next to the person or slightly behind them, because you don't want your loved one to lose sight of the fact that the conversation should be with them. That is first and foremost what's most important. And if that provider starts talking to the interpreter, then it can make that person feel like they're not valued or not important. And you also want to make sure that your physician or provider isn't saying, well, tell that person this, or tell them that, or I said this, or they said that. No. One question at a time, nice and slow, and make sure that if There are acronyms because we all know medical procedures have an acronym for every freaking thing. Keep it simple. Keep it simple. And if you or a loved one are trying to make sure they understand, have them do a teach back. So at the end of that particular visit or that discussion, say, all right, now it's time for you to show that you understand what's going to happen. Can you explain it to me? Can you point to something? Can you teach me what I just shared with you? And you also want to make sure that you have a conversation with the interpreter because we want to make sure that your patient records are as accurate as possible. So make sure that you are finalizing everything with the interpreter and that the doctor or healthcare provider also understands as well. And then remember, 21st Century Cures Act, you're going to get documentation related to the notes of your visit. So you're going to want to check that to make sure that there are no errors. If there are errors, you need to contact the Health Information Management Department of your clinic or hospital and indicate that you need to make a correction because the loved one had an interpreter during that visit and the information isn't correct and you need to change that. There are professionals that work with the doctors to make sure those charts get corrected. So again, don't worry about am I going to get taken care of? How is this going to work? It'll be okay. And another reason why, and this can be hard for some of us to hear because we know that we just want to do a good job. But a lot of times when you are working with a loved one or a family member or even children, we really should not put them in that position because a lot of times we don't even understand what's happening from a medical perspective. And we also want to make sure that when we're interpreting from our perspective, us being the loved one, that we're not introducing our own bias, that we're not telling the patient what they should and shouldn't do, or, oh, the doctor is wrong, so we're going to ignore that part. And you also want to make sure, especially when it's something really sensitive, that you're not putting yourself in an awkward position. So it's a lot that goes into this. It's not as simple as, well, I understand what this person is saying. We speak the same language, but there are going to be some things that may not necessarily be all that comfortable or even appropriate to have a discussion when you're there, or even if a husband or wife or spouse is there. So it's very, very important to make sure that we're keeping all of these things in the back of our minds when it comes to giving and receiving information and care. So I wanted to walk through all of that with you all today. And as always, if you have questions, you can email me at joyfulebony@gmail.com. And I will also link to all of the resources in the show note for today's episode. And with that, take care, friends. Okay, thyroid warriors, get out there and take things one step at a time. Remember, reflect on your triumphs, know that you are doing your best, and do what you need to do in order to be well. I would absolutely love it if you subscribe to this podcast and share this episode with a friend. And don't forget, leave me a review. I read those and try very hard to improve the show based upon your feedback. So I'd love to hear from you. And with that, be happy, be whole, and be well. Take care.